Good afternoon. I hope everyone is well and welcome to our 14th Lunch and Learn series. My name is Mercedes Ponce, and I'm the Assistant Vice President of Academic Planning and Accountability at FIU. I am particularly delighted to have the opportunity today to introduce Mr. Lawrence Gumbiner. We're honored to have Mr. Gumbiner with us today to lead a very provocative session on boosting trade and investment in the Americas in a post-COVID world. As many of you know, since you have been with us along this lifelong learning journey, 14 weeks ago, we launched a series in collaboration with Gumbiner, the Latin American Chamber of Commerce and Industry of the United States of America. The series primarily aims at discussing areas to help our business sectors maintain competitive, particularly in what we would all recognize as an unsettling and unprecedented period as a result of COVID-19. In many ways, the pandemic, and I think that you will all agree with me that no one can negate its heart-wrenching nature, has served as an accelerator to trends that were already underway in the areas of business practices and processes, IT, market positioning, and of course, lifelong learning. We seek through our series to challenge your assumptions and to provoke thinking, that is, different ways of thinking on innovation and competitiveness. I think that we would also all agree that undoubtedly we are witnessing a changing world economic order. And I'm particularly looking forward to Mr. Gumbiner's session, and via the fact that I'm certain that he will probe or provoke thought in areas that will be critical to our success. Some of the questions will relate to market outlook and strategic markets of opportunities, and ways that we can maximize together these opportunities. Before I turn over the forum to Mr. Gumbiner, it's important that I go over some basic logistics to help enhance your lunch and learn experience. As you know, the webinar is being recorded, which means that at your leisure, afterwards, you can always go back and review the session and its salient points. The chat tool, which you will find at the bottom of the screen, will only be enabled by our presenters, or in the case that we would like to share important information with you. We do encourage you, however, to use the question and answer tool at the bottom of the screen to pose questions. And please feel free to post questions in both Spanish and English. You will notice that once the session is over, you will receive a message that will ask that you complete a brief survey. Please do not forget to complete the survey, since it will allow us in the future to share important information regarding upcoming events. Now let me transition into the introduction. After a 31-year distinguished career as a diplomat, Mr. Gumbiner recently founded Gumbiner's Interamerican Strategies and serves as its president. At the U.S. Department of State, Lawrence specialized in Latin American affairs, particularly focusing on economic, commercial, and environmental policies. In his many years of distinguished service as a diplomat, he held a number of posts. These include serving as an acting U.S. ambassador in U.S. embassies in Havana, Cuba, Tegucigalpa, Honduras, and as Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Oceans, Environment, and Science. He has held the post of Deputy Ambassador in Lima, Peru, Deputy U.S. Representative to the Organization of American States, and lastly, Economic Counselor at the U.S. Embassy in Bogotá, Colombia. More recently, the U.S. State Department designated Mr. Gumbiner as Senior Fellow for the Americas at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, where he led U.S. business efforts in the 2018 Summit of the Americas. Please join me in welcoming Lawrence Gumbiner. Lawrence, would you like? The forum is yours. We welcome you to our Lunch and Learn series.
Thank you very much, Mercedes. A very kind introduction. Welcome, everybody. I would like to extend a particular thanks to FIU Continuing Education and Comical for the invitation to discuss this important issue with you today. As Mercedes mentioned, I've had a long career at the State Department. I started out under President Reagan. I finished my career under President Trump. And the great majority of that time and effort was dealing with Latin American policy, including embassies overseas and from Washington, D.C. So it's a great pleasure to be with you today. I look forward to the questions and the discussion. Y para nuestros colegas quienes prefieren hablar en castellano, con mucho gusto podemos recibir los comentarios y las preguntas en español cuando termino la conversación. So obviously we are in a tremendously turbulent time. It goes without saying that it's an uncertain time, and these are the best times, in my view, when we have to reflect, analyze, and really prepare for what comes next. The fact that what comes next is very uncertain shouldn't stop us from going forward. So I'd like to address some of those issues with you today, see where we have been in terms of trade and investment in Americas, what experiences we have and have learned from the past several decades, and then how can we plan and what can we do going forward. So the first discussion that I would like to bring forward is taking a look at where are we with world trade. And as you can see, and it's a pretty dramatic description here, we can see where our trade flows were heading in terms of prior to the 2008 economic crisis, how it then recovered in 2008 going forward, and then of course 2020 there's a huge downturn. The expectations, and we all know that economic expectations have to be taken with a grain of salt, and we don't know where we're going, but most economists, most analysts believe that 2021, and if not then 2022, we are going to see another recovery. There will be no doubt tremendous global demand built up when we get a handle on the health situation, when economies can completely open. So depending, you see the various scenarios here from the WTO, depending on how severe the downturn is. Since the panorama is changing, if not daily, certainly weekly, I encourage you, everybody, when looking at statistics, to keep that in mind, that these are moving targets that can change very quickly. But I think it is safe to say, as we are looking towards the future, that now is a time of holding fort, of keeping the downturn from being severe, and also preparing for when global economy will go forward. So we've got this huge hit from COVID, but also at the same time, and I think Mercedes correctly commented that the COVID has accelerated trends. We already had a very important trend underway in global economic terms, and that is the US and China relationship and some of the questions surrounding the dependence in global supply chains and global manufacturing on China. So let's take a look for a minute, and let's look here. Let me, okay. I just want to minimize something here. Okay, let's look a bit at China and U.S., what has happened over the last several decades. China has gone essentially from being a strategic competitor, which has been the approach the U.S. has taken for quite a while. And now there's a question mark there. Are we looking at a new Cold War? You know, where are we going? What is the process that we are going to be looking at going forward? In 40 years, you can see China's GDP per capita has increased 24 times. It is the largest trading company in the world. And now it is responsible for 35% of world manufacturing. Let me go back a bit. We can also see that they have become, in this process recently, not only an economic powerhouse, but more geopolitically aggressive. What does that mean? Traditionally, China was looked at from an economic standpoint. A mercantilist country was trying to build up its strength and its power globally. Now we can see that it has become more geopolitically aggressive and more of a concern for the global community. We see that in their actions in the South China Sea, where they have been very aggressive in gaining territory and in claiming territory from and often against what traditional international law offers them. We've seen it in their role in Venezuela, where they have bankrolled the Maduro regime and have not shown any signs of retreating from that. And of course, their huge global initiative, One Belt, One Road, which has been a major initiative to generate investment activities globally, particularly in Africa, but also in near Asia and in Latin America. And of course, at the bottom, we talk about corporate espionage and property rights infringement. And that has become a huge issue under the Trump administration, which has really accelerated pressure against the Chinese. This is not new. This is something that has been building up, and concerns have been building up for a long time about Chinese activity. What you see in a presidency of Donald Trump is a much more aggressive strategy against it. I'm sure all of you saw the news about the closing of the Houston consulate. You've seen lots of discussion and lots of accusations against the Chinese. A lot of it has grounded in truth. Our intel communities have pointed this out for years now. The question is, how do we handle it? So this predated the COVID issue, but of course the COVID issue provided the opportunity to really accelerate these trends. So what do we have now in the situation? We have, with Donald Trump as president, tensions plus the COVID situation, tensions are on the rise in the relationship. You can see how the president has threatened to cut off the relationship with China. He is continuing to blame China for COVID and its spread. We expect a lot of this is built into the campaign year, and we will expect this to increase and expect certainly this to become a big and major bone of contention during the presidential campaign. As you can see from the comment of Vice President Biden, he's also very much going to go on the attack against China. The Democrats as well see this as a campaign issue, and they don't want to be portrayed as weak on China. So China has jumped into a position of not only being a concern globally for us, but a domestic political campaign issue. And we will expect and should expect this to rise and to continue to be of concern during the course of the campaign. The question of who will be tougher on China is you will see that in the campaign discussions. Now, what does this mean for our future going forward and the role of globalization? I think it's safe to say that the globalized world and the globalized economy have produced a prosperity since World War II that the planet has never seen. Overall, the globalization has brought to the US, the developing world, to Asia, has been tremendous overall gains. But we are running into a situation now where those gains are being questioned and where there's a natural retreat as this crisis continues, as the COVID situation damages the local economy, and as people are feeling the pinch. There is more and more question of the future of globalization. We can see this in the United States, where there's the COVID situation plus the trade war that was building, the tariffs that were being put on. There's been a lot of questioning of our reliance on China as a supplier. Remember that previous slide, China was responsible for 35% of manufacturing. Many, many major corporations were highly dependent on Chinese supply chains. So you have Robert Lighthizer, the US Trade Representative, talking about the era of offshoring jobs is over. This, of course, is a consistent mantra of the Trump administration of trying to bring jobs back home to the US, rebuild our manufacturing capability. Peter Navarro, the president's economic advisor, has built on that. And this is the result of COVID, that we are particularly concerned now about our reliance on medicines and medical equipment in the face of the COVID crisis. So you have these dual, the one, build the US manufacturing capacity, and also concern for our ability to provide for the US security. It's just bringing us back to a question of sovereignty. We want jobs here in the US. We want to stop reliance on China. That is certainly the strong position of the Trump administration. And the focus, again, is on not transferring the supply chains to other parts, but bringing them back to the US. Now, if you paid attention to Vice President Biden's economic plan that he recently rolled out, you will see that he is trying to get into this space. He is trying to increase his presence in the build American jobs, build American capability, wean ourselves away from a globalized world. He is trying to steal some of that thunder from President Trump. And this is also part of the influence of Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, the more left part of the Democratic Party, which has also been traditionally skeptical of trade and reliance on globalized trade systems. They are also pushing for a more populist, nationalist position. So you will see this again during the campaign. I think we will expect to see more of an emphasis on bringing production back to the US, and that will be reflected as well on both sides of the political spectrum. Now, we talked about the problems we're in. We talked about the political turbulence, the economic crisis. It's a good time to reflect and remind of our good friend Rahm Emanuel, who some might remember as the mayor of Chicago, some might remember as chief of staff to President Barack Obama. And he has a famous quote. Usually the quote is given just the first part. You never want a serious crisis to go to waste. The second part, I think, is also important, an opportunity to do things that you could not do before. We are no doubt in a serious crisis brought on by COVID-19. The economic situation is going to continue to be very dire in the coming months, but we have to start, as I said at the beginning, think of the opportunities. Where can we go from here? And what can we do to rebuild and build up our economic prowess again? And what opportunities are there for the US entrepreneur, for the Latin American entrepreneur? How can we take advantage of this combination of the crisis in Asia with China and COVID to benefit and build a stronger network here in the Americas. So let's look at some things that can, or first of all, there's already, as in any economic situation, been an adjustment, and there are many products that are flourishing. There are many, we all know and hear daily the problems that we're having with restaurants, with travel, with hotels, but there we have to look at the other elements and the other products that have been able to take advantage of the crisis and build up and actually move forward quite aggressively. Some are very obvious: exercise machines. People are staying at home. They will be staying at home for the near future, maybe even longer. What does this mean? Food products. People are cooking more at home. Obviously, cleaning and disinfectants are going to be on the rise, medicines and medical equipment, furniture and appliances. People are looking around them. I've got a friend who is a furniture manufacturer in Colombia, and he's never been busier. People are at home, they're looking around, they're saying, gee, that bookshelf I always wanted to replace, let me go out and do it, let me contact people. Furnitures and appliances, people are going to be paying more attention to their home situation. Pet supplies. Pets are a very important part of people's lives. They always have been, but now there's a lot of attention, and obviously toys. Children are at home. They're going to need entertainment. So this is just a small example of that have been able to flourish in the middle of the crisis. And there will be more, and there are more, and everybody should be thinking about what are the areas and the growth potential that we have. Now, that was a COVID-related boost. How about the boost to the global economy? And this is, a lot of this is pre-COVID, but it's indicative because we can expect in the post-COVID world these trends to continue. The U.S.-China trade war has also generated some benefits. Obviously, Chinese exports to the U.S. have been substantially reduced, which means there is a void. A lot of people want to replace that with purely domestic U.S. consumption, but that's not realistic. We know that there is going to be an improvement in the U.S. domestic performance, but a lot of the products that China provided simply cannot be replaced, at least in the short term, by U.S. production. We have to go elsewhere. So there have been beneficiaries of the trade war, that we have already seen shifts in a pre-COVID world, and those shifts will continue and perhaps accelerate with the political imperatives brought on by COVID. So who is taking advantage? Where are these shifts taking place? Again, this data is mostly pre-COVID, so this could move around, and our challenge, those of us who work in the Latin America space, is to see how we can boost and move and shift some of this trade activity towards the Latin America and Caribbean region. As you can see, the biggest countries that have taken advantage thus far of the move away from China have been Vietnam, Mexico, and Taiwan. We can expect and look, and we'll see this in a poll in a minute, in another slide, that Southeast Asia and Mexico should be the biggest beneficiaries. We'll talk about why that is and the reasons why the Mexico advantage needs to be expanded and can be expanded throughout the hemisphere. But for the time being, Mexico and some of Colombia have been able to take advantage of these trade shifts, but very few of the other countries in the hemisphere have been able to fill that void. And so there's going to be a movement. There's a lot of the companies that are accustomed to Asian supply chains are going to want to stay in Asia. They are used to it. They've established. The question is, what will make them diversify and reestablish here in the Americas? And that is a challenge that I think we all need to look at. And those of us involved in trade in this part of the region see how we can build that up, turn that up, because there are great advantages from a business standpoint in the United States, but also to a security standpoint and geopolitical standpoint. We have a stake in a strong economy in the Americas. We have a stake in strong democracies in the Americas. This can be bolstered by trade. And now is the opportunity to do so. Now is when we should have US business thinking about how to move towards more activity in the Americas. So when we talked before about reshoring and about the Trump administration's focus on reshoring, and you can see this quote from Donald Trump that reflects that view. We shouldn't have supply chains, we should all in the United States, but we know that is not realistic. And what the private sector will look for is ways to shift their reliance on Chinese supply chains, but not necessarily in the US. We hope there will be some in the US, but they will also look elsewhere, as we have seen. And this is a survey on the bottom part. The survey is conducted by the American Chamber of Commerce, China and Shanghai. This is pre-COVID again. And you can see the high percentage of companies that are considering or are relocating manufacturing outside of China. And as I mentioned before, the immediate beneficiaries where they will turn is Southeast Asia and Mexico as their top destinations. So these companies are already thinking of it pre-COVID, driven again by the tensions we talked about in the US and China relationship, the discomfort of reliance on Chinese supplies. Also, there's a cost element. Chinese production has risen in recent years as labor costs have gone up and as health and safety controls have been grudgingly implemented. So part of it is cost and part of it is just the discomfort of relying on China, but we will see this continue to shift, and it's a time for Latin America to have an opportunity to take advantage. So what is that advantage? What can be really sold to the business community, to the investment community of why to go to Latin America? Well, the first obvious one is proximity to markets. You can see it, and we saw it in the map that we just showed, the global map. The ability for products to get to the US and to Europe for many of the Latin American countries is much preferable to the time that is required from Asia. When I was running the embassy in Honduras, we had visits from a company that was producing jerseys, sports jerseys in San Pedro Sula. And what they told me was, sports jersey, which is many people don't realize, can be viewed as a perishable object. When LeBron James goes to the Lakers, everybody wants a jersey that says LeBron James on it from the Lakers. They want it right away. He said the advantage of us going from San Pedro Sula to US markets in 4 days versus the 40 days of their factories in Asia was a huge benefit. They were moving production from Asia towards Honduras, and it was because of the proximity to the market. Unfortunately, I don't think Latin American countries have fully taken advantage of that proximity. That is something that should be emphasized more strongly by the Latin American countries. It should be prioritized to make their processes and their shipping more efficient, to make sure that that advantage is fully understood. And we can really do that and really push that because that should be a no-brainer. And under the FTAs that we have, that should be something that is clearly an advantage to increased investment. The FTA network, there are 11 FTAs with Latin American and Caribbean countries. As we will see later, there are possibilities on accumulation that can be taken advantage of. And then finally, cultural links and time zones. That is an underrated benefit. You can really emphasize, and it should be emphasized to the US business community and to the global investment community, that these cultural links, the ability to deal with people in the same hemisphere is a grand advantage. When people have questions, when they have problems, when they need to get on a plane and get down, this cultural links as being on the same time zone is a great advantage. These are advantages that Latin American countries have to push, but it's also for the US investment community, ones they should take into account. Now, the warning signal on the bottom is a real one. And as we talk to the investment community, this is a huge problem. We'll get into other bottlenecks and difficulties and why countries like to deal often with Asia or are not looking at this part of the world as much as they should. But this is recently, and we are talking about changing of the rules. Stability, legal certainty is a huge difficulty for a lot of countries learning, wanting to invest in the region. And it is imperative that the governments and that through the mechanism of free trade agreements, we establish that legal certainty and that comfort level that the rules will not be changed on the investment community. You may have read recently, there is an FTA issue with Colombia about a large US investment called Meritage, which has been seized by the fiscal in Medellin on what is being considered, or at least is alleged to be corruption within the Fiscalia at Medellin. It is turning to the FTA. These issues will happen. Corruption allegations will be made. What is critical is that the FTA works as it was designed to provide confidence in the legal and judicial resolution. If investor believes that they will not get an honest shake and they will not, their investment will not be considered as on a par with domestic investments, and whether the judges are subject to influences, that kind of investment that you need in Latin America simply will not happen. So it's very important, this issue of making sure the rules stay the same. Now, let's take a look at where Latin America and the Caribbean compares, and we'll see in a couple of these instances. This is a bit of a complex slide, so I don't expect everybody to read through it, but this is the World Economic Forum's competitive index from 2019. So it's kind of the most recent data about where Latin America and Caribbean stands. And you can see in general terms, the darker is the stronger performance, the lighter is the weaker performance, and that we have several areas where Latin America and the Caribbean still is essentially bringing up the rear with sub-Saharan Africa. Now, if you look at the top, East Asia and the Pacific, remember, a lot of those countries are going to be the competitors, as well as South Asia, further, be the competitors for these trade shifts and these shifts in supply chains. So it's important to compare and contrast, see where the region is pulling up the rear, see where they're doing well, and try to adjust and make those changes necessary. Critical ones are the institutions. We talked about that. Infrastructure, that is a key one as well. We all know that Asian countries are very efficient and have developed strong infrastructure networks. It's been a mixed result in Latin America and the Caribbean. Need to get going on that. And health and macroeconomic stability has done quite well. Has been some improvement, but there are still areas of labor market skills and the business climate, the entrepreneurial climate, that is of still great concern. Now, these rankings have moved a little bit over the years, but I would say with the exception of macroeconomic stability and health has not moved sufficiently as Latin America and the Caribbean should be going forward. There's no reason why they should be pulling up some of these categories with sub-Saharan Africa, and there's no reason why it shouldn't be closer to East Asia and the Pacific. These are elements that the policymakers in the country need to look at and need to reassure, because when a business is going to go into a country with a major investment, these are some of the qualities, these are some of the categories that they were going to look at. So what can the countries of Latin America and the Caribbean do to really help these trade shifts, these investment shifts come to the region? Well, it's no secret that nothing brings in investment like a stable environment free from excessive government regulation. Business looks at simplifying regulatory structures. The second one is key, and this is also where Latin America countries tend to not be as competitive as Asia, which is flexibility in labor markets. Now, it's understood strong labor laws are important, but if a company is looking at a labor structure that does not give them the ability to hire and fire with ease, that presents too great a load, that is going to be a huge difficulty for that investment. A one-stop shop for permits. Countries are always talking about it, la ventanilla única. Very few countries have really been successful to really streamline the permit process. And it has to be streamlined, and we'll go back to number 5 here, in a way that does not require corruption and bribery. Number 4 is rule of law and legal certainty. We talked about that, how critical that is. There needs to be a respect and an understanding that the investment will be protected in the event of attacks from unscrupulous characters, and there can be an honest judicial system. And then the last one, just hugely important, is a serious fight against corruption. And I say serious because everybody now is looking at corruption and saying the right things. The countries that are really tackling it are the ones that are going to get ahead. As you know, the Odebrecht scandal has impacted a number of countries in Latin America. I was at one of my first few days at our embassy in Peru as the number 2 in the embassy was when an award of a huge pipeline, the Southern Gas Pipeline, was given to Odebrecht over GE. And so we had a lot of dealings with it at that point. GE knew and we knew that there had been corruption, that there had been bribery, but there was nothing we could do to turn around that award at that time. I will give the Peruvian government credit. They have tackled their corruption problem with a seriousness that many countries in the region have not. There are several ex-presidents who are in jail or under judicial processes, as well as other officials. But that just reinforces the necessity to attack it with a serious fight. We have, in my long career in trying to encourage U.S. investment in the region, I can tell you that one of the major stumbling blocks is the feeling that countries and that unless companies are willing to bribe, which of course ours cannot under the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, whereas their competitors from France or Korea or other places are able to do so, that there will not be a level playing field. That kind of attitude, if you want major investment projects in the region, if you want U.S. companies to come in on some of the big investment infrastructure and others, the corruption issue has to be tackled. Now let's talk a little bit about the investment and supply chains, because a lot of the talk that we already discussed with China was exactly on the subject of supply chains. And when we talk about reshoring and nearshoring, we're almost exclusively talking about the global supply chains. That, as I began by saying, has brought great prosperity to the world. Global supply chains are here to stay. We're seeing some talk of countries pulling in and trying to recreate just national supply chains. I think that is a temporary result of the turbulence that we're in. In the long term, we're still looking at supply chains being global. However, it is true that the move away from reliance on China will continue to accelerate. Where those supply chains go is an interesting question. The Peterson Institute of International Economics did a study back in 2014. So again, this predated a lot of the turbulence we're now seeing about where companies invested in developing countries in supply chains, where it worked and where it didn't. And they looked at 5 countries. They looked at Costa Rica, Malaysia, Morocco, Czechoslovakia, and South Africa. So a broad array of countries from different parts. And the conclusions are that you see below are where they concluded that the investment in supply chains work the best. So this is a list of, from experience, what countries can do to try to bring in supply chain investment. And the first one was upfront investments by the country. So we're not looking for a strong industrial policy here, because that is not always the best positive way to go forward. But we do need to see countries that are willing to put in the infrastructure, train their employees, and have the institutional and tax reforms that are required in order to bring the country. And what the study found is it's not enough during the negotiations to say, come and we will do these things. So that's why the term upfront is key. We need the investments have to be in place. Those are the places where companies wanted to go. The second was the ease of integration into the parent company's global supply chain. So it's fairly tautological. Companies want to look at how easily they will be able to integrate and combine the various supply chains into their other countries. The third is efforts to attract top-level suppliers to benefit investment and dependable local suppliers. One of the studies, obviously, that they undertook as part of this investigation was Intel's arrival in Costa Rica, and how Intel served to bring in other top-notch suppliers in the chip industry, and how the Costa Rica's efforts to bring in other first-level suppliers helped Intel make the decision to go to Costa Rica. So you want to have a country that is not only working to bring in the major parent company, but bring in other companies of first level suppliers who can then provide that supply, as well as local suppliers. So you have to demonstrate that your local suppliers are available, efficient, and consistent. And then finally, a strong presence from investment promotion agencies, both to attract and follow up on the investment. The successful investments, the successful work on supply chains came in those countries where the investment promotion agency not only worked hard to bring the investment in, but then was present, was active, was available to follow up on the investment to assure that it took place. So this is just a useful collection of ideas. This shows where, if you are a country looking to establish and bring in supply chain investors, this is what you should look at. And if you are looking to set up your supply chain investment in a country, in the developing world, and in Latin America and Caribbean, these are the elements you need to look at, where history and experience tells us you will have the most successful investment experience. Now let me finish with, just as I talked about, one idea that is really practical and that is being worked on, and I've been in discussions with people in Latin America on that, which is moving and discussing accumulation of origin in the region that's built on our experience with NAFTA, but that should and can be expanded to that network of FTAs throughout the region. So the first, and why this slide is very important, is because one of the strong arguments for engaging in the supply chain in the Americas, as well as the accumulation argument, is that it creates better value for US companies. As we mentioned, particularly Donald Trump and his administration, but also the Democratic Party and its candidate, Joe Biden, are going to look to create and argue that this creates value in jobs in the US. This is the difference of, and it's only focused on Mexico and Canada, but it's focused on the average of Mexican and Canadian investment in the Americas and what value that brings to the US manufacturing capability. As you can see, it greatly exceeds what China brings to the table. Now, pleasantly, accumulation of origin, it exists. You can do it between the NAFTA countries and the CAFTA countries, Central America and the Dominican Republic. You cannot do it within the Andean countries. So you cannot bring in thread from Peru into Colombia, do the manufacturing, and have it considered as the origin under the FTA. That was lost when the FTAs were negotiated. For those of you who know the history of our involvement in this region, that there was a program called ATB-DEA, which was a program that the US government gave to the Andean countries to help them fight the drug war and gave them preferences. There was accumulation there, and that was lost when the FTAs were negotiated. It was not a policy decision to lose it. It just, when individual free trade agreements were negotiated, it was lost. So these are great opportunities now, and this is something that that we should bring forward. And I think all of us interested in Latin America and the Caribbean investment can work together on, which is how do we knit together and utilize the FTAs we have throughout the region to create value and to accumulate the origin so that these products get quicker and deeper access into the US market. As we said, you start with the principle that production in the Americas creates more value for US business as well, but also you add to the fact that development of Latin American countries, economic development, political stability is of strategic importance to the United States of America, and that we should look at that and look at this accumulation and use of FTAs as a way of strengthening our relationships throughout the hemisphere and generating more prosperity. It also reduces pressures for immigration, which is a particular concern, certainly to President Trump and his administration, but really will be an issue that's with us a long time. So this is really a winning policy. It does require congressional action because right now, congressionally, they're prohibited, but hopefully we can move forward with this soon. So I wanted to finish with that general idea that this is a specific area we can move on, and now is the time to be laying the groundwork during this crisis to move forward. All countries are going to be looking to burst forward when the crisis ends, and if we can have these elements ready and we can have investments lined up, it will benefit all of us, in my view. And I will leave you with this quote, because it's useful to remember that this is not the only time in which we have confronted serious crises globally, economically, in terms of geopolitical stability. And this quote is, as we see, at this point in history, the world will either move forward toward unity and widely shared prosperity, or it will move apart. And we are at that point now. And this quote was made in 1945 by President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. It's useful to recall the turbulence, the uncertainty, where we are headed, the widespread poverty that existed post-World War II, and also useful to remember that we were able to pull together and create the greatest era of prosperity in modern history. So this can be done. It will be done. I think we need to have optimism. I think we need to take this time to reflect and move forward. And with that, I will thank you. I really appreciate everyone's attention, and I look forward to your questions.
Lawrence, we cannot thank you enough for your very provocative and compelling presentation. I must say that in a week whereby my vocabulary enhanced by one word, doom scrolling, which is a word I would have preferred not to have had in my vocabulary, your presentation was really refreshing from the point of view of bringing optimism, bringing tools, and particularly not only going through a sweeping analysis of the gains of globalization, but also helping us think through the process of positioning ourselves during this particular period to capture imperative opportunities for the well-being of our respective communities. Thank you very much also for reinforcing the concept of interdependence within the hemisphere. It's really a very compelling message. I hope that our audience today took at heart, all the tools that you have presented to us, and and all the very, compelling insights to help us during this period to overcome challenges. And wonderful, wonderful, way to end with a quotation from FDR. Wonderful reminder of what's ahead. Again, based and anchored on hope and optimism. Now, we have a number of questions, so I think we better, turn the page to the questions and see your response. Here we go, the first one. All right, this is an important one. What about education in the overall technology strategy?
I think that's critical, and I think that we all know, we've all seen the statistics about education in Latin America, and I think it needs to take a huge boost forward. I think the whole entrepreneurial culture, that is an area where Latin America and the Caribbean have traditionally fallen a bit behind. And that is something that there needs to be an ecosystem and encouragement. And one area that I think is clearly critical, and when I was Deputy Assistant Secretary of State, I worked on science and technology issues a lot. And that is the relationship between academia and the private sector. In the U.S., one of the great reasons for our robust entrepreneurship is that academia works together with private sector. There has traditionally been more of a division in the hemisphere on that. There are many people who are academics who do not want to get into bed with business, and that has to change. And there have to be systems through intellectual property laws that encourage entrepreneurial and technological advancement. One area that Latin America has done quite well is in English training. The US government has helped that, and that has been of great benefit in terms of software development, in terms of businesses such as call centers or technical centers. So that English training is very important in that regard. But overall, I think the culture of entrepreneurship starts with giving Latin America qualified people, because we all know they're tremendously qualified, opportunities to build their businesses at home.
Okay. So we have let's look at this question. Why doesn't Mexico have a more robust manufacturing presence in the world? The question goes on. You would think that with its close proximity to the US and its low cost of labor, it would be an ideal location for manufacturing. Is it a regulatory issue? Is it lack of security? What are your thoughts?
I think it's a little bit of all of the above. You're right, they should be much more robust. They have really had tremendous gains, despite the questions of NAFTA and now USMCA. I don't think there's any doubt that their capabilities have grown tremendously and has encouraged prosperity as a result of the free trade agreements with the U.S. But what is holding them back are similar to the issues that we discussed in the talk. Legal certainty is a huge one. There is still a question of the training, the job training, and the labor flexibility. Those types of elements are what they really need to get forward. And referring to the last question, education as well. Their educational levels have not kept pace with the ability and with the growth and interest in investing in Mexico.
What are your thoughts about Argentina? How do you see Argentina in this new trade scheme in relations with the U.S.?
Argentina is, I think, a very complicated situation, and it really has been since the growth of the Peronist movement, and that has really had a stranglehold on the political system. There were tremendous hopes for the presidency under Macri that could change things around, and certainly the relations with the U.S. improved. Now with President Fernandez, things have become complicated once again. I think what Argentina needs is several administrations that have clearly sent the message that we are open for business. I think you have serious labor flexibility issues and problems with the unions there that have a real stranglehold, and then of course the official corruption. So Argentina, I think, will go back and forth for the time being. This negotiation with their creditors will be very important. They've done this before where they've had problems with defaults, and that will mean international investment will dry up. So what I think you need is a consistent policy platform that goes over 2 or 3 administrations to give the international investment community confidence. There was some hope with Mercosur that would be able to finally move from being overly politicized back to being the customs union as was originally designed, as a real motor of investment and economic activity. That's taken a step backwards now too with the tensions between Bolsonaro and President Fernandez. So I think Argentina is in a difficult situation. I think it'll take some time to get it straightened out.
A couple of questions that really challenges all of us to think about the recovery and how long the recovery will take. We have a question that specifically asks, do you think that 1 year is enough for the Latin American economic recovery? Is such a time frame acceptable time, a realistic time in this unequal world?
Mm-hmm. That's a very good question. A lot of this right now, what I say today can change tomorrow or in a week because there is so much uncertainty as where things are going. I think right now, 1 year is on the optimistic end of the scale, which means it is doable, but it depends on things falling into place and getting a handle. I think getting a vaccine at least available in the shortest amount of time possible will be key. As we know, the Latin American countries, because of the poverty, the social distancing, difficulties among the lower part of the socioeconomic segment, as well as weakness in some of the public health systems, are going to take some time to fully recover. That being said, I think once there is a sense of that the world is open for investment and business again, I think for the reasons we talked about here, Latin America is well positioned to ramp up new investments, new business opportunities fairly quickly.
There's a question also that probes, the whole concept of Mexico taking China's place as a product provider for the U.S., given Mexico's situation. The author, or the person who posed a question, brings our attention to the lack of fight or will against corruption. The cartels are even more powerful, and the current relationship with the U.S. And so I guess, we're asking you to think, what will really turn these challenges around to ensure that Mexico really can position itself to take, advantage of, the gap that is already in place in terms of U.S. and China.
Yeah, that's,
And,
go ahead.
And finally, how do you think don't you think that multinationals would not only relocate the factory, but also bring the Chinese production model? Bad working conditions, low payment, in terms of labor.
Those are both very good questions. Let me address Mexico first. I mean, Mexico has all the advantages and is not necessarily taking advantage of it for the reasons we mentioned. So the proximity to the US market, having land infrastructure where you can move product back and forth over land is huge. Obviously being right on the border, being able to manufacture on the border is huge. Good labor force, hardworking. Unfortunately, AMLO, current president, has not been able to give assurances to the business community that there is the security in their investment. And the comment I made and what the Financial Times was referring to was a factory that was being built near the border, that was close to being finished, had lots of jobs to provide, and the government pulled their permit. So as long as those things persist, I think the violence, as difficult as it is, I think can be overcome. I think they really need to, be able to increase security, obviously, but I think certainly in the key areas in the north part of the country that are providing product to the American and Canadian market, I think you can provide enough security to move forward. But the legal certainty questions are huge, and the confidence that the administration will continue pro-business practices is really critical. And go ahead.
We have a couple more questions if you allow us to pose them. I know that we're getting close to the end of our lifelong learning session. And one of them is of particular, I think, interest to all of us, and it relates to the vaccine, right? So the question being asked is, can the U.S. lead the manufacturing and include Latin American, countries in a massive vaccine initiative?
That is a very interesting question, and certainly I think the global community right now is struggling with, there are several independent vaccine research operations underway now, and by several different companies. What happens when one is successful or as they get rolled out? We have the global community needs to, which is, there are billions of people who are going to need to eventually get the vaccine. Unfortunately, the pharmaceutical industry in Latin America and the Caribbean hasn't been sufficiently developed because of intellectual property issues. So I think it's much more likely that the vaccine development will take place between US and Europe and perhaps Asia. I don't see it reasonable right now that there be massive vaccine buildup. But I think one thing that is critically important that we should begin discussing now is when a vaccine is available, to make sure that it's not just the developed countries that get access, and that the pricing of it takes place in a manner that we can reach a lot of the global poor, not only Latin America and the Caribbean, but in Asia and Africa, so that this isn't seen as just a rich person's solution.
I think we can end with this last one. Many companies are considering a China plus one strategy to avoid problems or deficiencies in the supply chain. So could you expand a little bit more about the countries in Latin America suitable to take this place right now?
That's an excellent point. It depends a lot on the product you have. I would say, first of all, you have to start with Mexico for the reason we discussed. Having a land border and being able to move product by truck is very critical. I think the other ones that are top notch would be the Caribbean basin because of its proximity. And I would put Colombia in that. I think Colombia is very well positioned. They have excellent ports on the Caribbean coast that are, they're actually closer to the east coast of the US than most Mexican ports. No, people don't realize that you go from Barranquilla or Cartagena into the east coast, you're actually quicker than from some of the Mexican. So for sea travel, I think Colombia, Chile is always very well positioned because when you look at competitiveness rankings, when you look at institutionality in the region, Chile regularly comes up on top, along with Costa Rica, who I would add as my final, the country that is well positioned to do it. And both Costa Rica, Chile, and Colombia for its proximity to Panama also can reach West Coast markets in a relatively short period of time.
Lawrence, we can't thank you enough for your support, your compelling presentation, and also for your message again of optimism and you know, and hope. I think it's critical. We thank you for your service throughout so many years to the U.S. government and to our hemisphere, and we wish you the best. If we have any additional questions, we will share them with you. But for now, again, we would like to extend, you know, a strong abrazo to you for this wonderful, you know, support of our Life and Learn session. What we would like now is also to let our participants know that we are grateful to Camacol for the partnership that it has extended FIU in the delivery of the Lunch and Learn sessions for the last close to 3 months. Next week, we hope that the participants will join us. We will have also another very thought-provoking seminar on thought leadership. What does it mean? How does it work? And what you would need to know to be successful. The presentation will be presented by Mr. Ian McCluskey, and it will be delivered in Spanish. Before I wish all of you, you know, a wonderful rest of the week, and to thank you for your participation in our series, let me turn over the session to Mr. Gumbiner for the last parting words. Larry, do you want to take it from here? And many thanks.
Well, thank you. No, it's just a great thanks to all of you and all of you listening in. You play a really important role in this recovery. Wherever your interest lies in relationships between the U.S. and the hemisphere, that's where we're going to build a new future. So I just, you know, thank you for participating. Thanks again to FIU and Camacol for the invitation. And I'm available to continue relationship questions, discussions to anybody who is interested.
Thank you very much. Stay well. And good afternoon.